Welcome to Powers and Roots of Exponential Notation. So here we're going to look at square roots and taking powers, so taking the square or the cube or so on with higher powers of some numbers. So first let's look at taking numbers to a power. For example, 2 cubed. So most calculators have a key labeled in one of the following ways that will allow us to perform this calculation. We either have a key that has an x raised to the y, or a y raised to the x, or maybe it's written out this way with a y caret x, and this means that the x is superscripted, or sometimes it's just a caret button. And so in each of these cases, we might have to press a slightly different combination of buttons on the calculator. Typically, it's going to be the 2 button, and then one of our 4 buttons here. So I'm just going to write here the power button. And that's again going to be one of these 4 buttons, whichever one you have on your calculator. And then you press the 3 button, and then typically the enter button. So take a moment, pause the video, and I want you to type this calculation into your calculator, and I want you to see what you get. So remember that 2 cubed means we have 2 times 2 times 2, which is then 8, because 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8. Now, remember that if we increase our power, so if we had, say, 2 raised to the 6th power, that would mean that we have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So if we go through and calculate these 2 will be a 4, those 2 will be another 4, and these 2 will be another 4. So if we have 4 times 4, that's then 16, and 16 times 4 gives us then 64. And of course we can do this with other numbers than 2, and so we can just write out as many multiples of our number as we need. But of course, as we get a number in our exponent here that is higher than just a few, higher than 5 or 6, it just becomes impractical to expand it out this way. And this is why we want to have that button on our calculator where we can just type in a 2, type whichever of those 4 buttons you have on your calculator, type the 6, and hit the enter button. Because of course if you have something like 34 up here, that's going to be way too high for you to want to try to do all of these out. You're pretty likely to be making a mistake that way. So now let's look at what happens when we have a power and exponential notation, or maybe scientific notation. So if we have a case like this, where we have 10 to the 4th raised to the 5th power, we multiply the exponents. And so of course 4 times 5 is then 20. So then 10 to the 4th raised to the 5th power is then 10 to the 20. So let's look at another example. Here we have 10 to the negative 4 raised to the 5th power. And that means that we have 10 to the negative 4 times 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 10 to the negative 4. But that's going to be a little bit hard for us to work out. So instead, let's just remember to multiply our exponents. So in this case, we have now a negative 4 times 5. So negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. And that means that our result here is 10 to the negative 20. So here we have a very small number, whereas in the previous case we had a very large number. 10 to the positive 20 is a large number. 10 to the negative 20 is a very small number, a number that's very close to 0. Let's look at one more example. In this case we have 10 to the negative 4 raised to the negative 5 power. So again, we're still going to multiply our exponents. So we have negative 4, now multiplied by negative 5. And remember, a negative times a negative gives us a positive. So now we have plus 20. And that means that our result here is 10 raised to the plus 20. So again, here we have a very large number. So what if we have a coefficient along with our exponential? That is, what if we have scientific notation and not just a 10 raised to some power? Well, in this case, we're going to have 2.0 times 10 to the minus 4 raised to the third power. So taking the cube of our 2.0 times 10 to the minus 4. Well, here we could treat these two individually. So I'm going to write these out as 2.0 cubed times 10 to the minus 4 cubed. Well, we know that 2 cubed is 8, so 8.0, and then times whatever our 10 to the minus 4 cubed is. Well, here we have minus 4 times 3, and that gives us negative 12, so then we have 10 to the negative 12. And let's go back and check. We remember that we know we need to have 3 2.0 times 10 to the negative 4s. So we have 2.0 times 10 to the negative 4 times another 2.0 times 10 to the negative 4 times another 2.0 times 10 to the negative 4. And we can then group all of our 2's together. So 2 times 2 is 4, times another 2 gives us then 8.0. And then we have 10 to the negative 4 times 10 to the negative 4 times 10 to the negative 4. So 10 to the negative 4 times 10 to the negative 4 is then going to give us 10 to the negative 8 times another 10 to the negative 4. That's going to give us 10 to the minus 12. So times 10 to the minus 12. And of course, our two values that we've gotten here and there are the same value. So be very careful when you're doing these exponential notations to a power with a calculator, because you need to remember your order of operations. So this is all going to depend on how exactly you're typing in this 3.0 times 10 to the 5. So if you're typing in the 3.0 as hitting the 3 button, and then hitting 0.0, and then hitting the multiply button, and then typing a 1 and a 0, and then typing a caret and a 5 to get your 3.0 times 10 to the 5. In this case then, your calculator is treating 3.0 as one number, the 10 as a number, and the 5 as a different number. So then, with the order of operations, it takes 10 to the 5, and it raises that, so you get 10 to the 5, and then it's multiplying that 10 to the 5 by a 3.0. And if this is all you have in the calculation, then it's fine. Your calculator does the order of operations correctly. But if you then have this squared in there, so if you then go to type in to the second power, now it starts screwing things up. Because now your calculator does the 10 to the 5 here, and then takes that and squares it, and then it takes that whole result and multiplies by 3. Because exponents come before multiplication in the order of operations. And this means that what you need to do is you need to type an open and close parentheses in here before you go to square it. Because remember, we want to square the 3 here in addition to our 10 to the 5. So you either then need to put in these parentheses there before you go to square it, or you can type in this number in a slightly different way. If you type in 3.0 and then hit the E button, sometimes it's E, sometimes it's an EE button, but if you type in 3.0 E5, that E there means times 10 to the, and then whatever character comes next. So 3.0 E5 is the same thing as 3.0 times 10 to the 5, but in this case your calculator knows that this E5 is not a number all by itself. It means that it must group all of these together. And in this case now we can just go caret 2 and then our enter button. And so in this case here, because our calculator is treating the 3.0 E5 all as one number, it knows that you're trying to type that in as scientific notation, then we don't need the parentheses here or there. But if you're actually hitting the multiply button, so 3.0 and then a multiply button and then a 1 and a 0 and then a caret 5. If you're typing it this way, you must put these parentheses in, otherwise your order of operations will mean that this squared occurs before that multiply, and that means that you're not then squaring that 3. Right? In this case, you're squaring this entire number, which means then you are squaring that 3. So be really careful when you're typing these sorts of calculations into your calculator. So when we're taking square roots with a calculator, it's usually pretty easy because you generally have a square root button that looks something like this, or maybe there's an X under there. And so in this case, if you want to take, say, the square root of 4, well, you type a 4, and then you hit that square root button. Or depending on your calculator, you might hit the square root button, and it might have a parentheses like this, and then you type the 4, and then generally you can just hit the enter button or hit a close parentheses and then hit enter. And of course, in each of these cases, you're then going to get a value of 2 here, because the square root of 4 is 2. Because, of course, if we take 2 and we square it, we get 4. Well, that's all well and good if we have a square root. But we can take other roots. Instead of taking the square root, we can take the cube root or the fourth root or some higher powered root. And so when we have some other calculator, then generally very few calculators have a dedicated button for an nth root, so most calculators don't have a cube root button or a fourth root button. Instead, some of them have a button that looks something like this, where you'd have a Y up there with an X inside, but very few of them do. Most of the time, we're going to need to take our root in a different way. So in this case, if we have the fourth root of 16, in this case what we can do is we can use a fractional power. So we can type this in as 16 raised to the, and then open parentheses, and our fractional power is going to be 1 over whatever root we have. So in this case it's going to be 1 over 4. Right? That is, so we're taking the inverse of whatever our root there is. Right? So a 4 becomes 1 over 4, a cube root would be 1 over 3, a fifth root would be 1 over 5. And so now 16 raised to the 1 over 4 gives us our fourth root, and in this case then our value is 2. So let's go back and check. If this is true, then we need to be able to say 2 raised to the fourth power is 16. And let's check and make sure that that's true. We know that 2 raised to the fourth must be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Well, 2 times 2 gives us 4, and another 2 times 2 gives us 4, and 4 times 4 does in fact give us 16. So this is right. So again, when you're plugging in a root that is larger than a square root, and you don't have a button for it on your calculator, what you can do is plug in the number that you have underneath your root symbol. So you have, in this case, 16, and then caret, so you're raising it to a power, and then you're raising it to the inverse of whatever number you have up there. Right? So whatever the n is in your nth root. And so in this case, the inverse is then 1 over whatever that number is, so 1 over 4 in this case, and then close parentheses and hit the enter button, and that then gives you your result. So go ahead and do this on your calculator, pause the video, and check and make sure that you're getting the same result that I am.